In this video I'm going to talk about one of the approaches I use for playing outside. So there are of course several ways you can go about playing outside, and the one I'm going to talk about in this video is called reharmonization, because what I do is I change the chords to get some other sounds that I can sort of put on top of the song that I'm playing. This works really well for playing songs with a lot of chords like standards or the modern jazz pieces, but of course there are other ways, and maybe that's something I can sort of get into in other videos. So first let's just talk about what's the point of playing outside. So what you want to achieve when you're trying to play something that's outside is that you want to play something that's, for the listener, is going to sound unexpected and surprising, maybe even shocking. And the way you're going to do that is that you have to find some way of introducing some notes that are not really what the listener is expecting at that point of the song. So especially if you already played a few choruses, it's easier because whoever's listening and also the people you're playing with are expecting certain things at certain places in the song. And if you start changing that around, then it's going to sound outside. That's also why something like an alto dominant is actually also sounding outside, but we're so used to it that for most people it doesn't really work like an outside sound anymore. What you still have to be aware of is that when you're playing outside, you still have to play melodies that make sense. So you can't just sort of pick out the notes that are not there. I mean, you could of course try and do that, but if you just pick out the notes, it can be difficult to play something that makes sense. And that's where reharmonization is a really useful tool, because if we're playing on any song, then usually we're playing on some chords, and we're used to making melodies on chords. So if we just replace the chords that are in the song already with something else that's going to sound far away and is very different from what was already there, then we can play this other chord sequence and get that to sound logical, because it's a chord sequence. We can make good strong melodies on it, but at the same time it's going to sound pretty surprising on top of what is already there in the song. So in that way it's an easy way to sort of approach that. To demonstrate this, I'm going to take the standard, the LNBNLU. I'm going to use that. That's also the song that I used for my video on how to memorize a standard. So hopefully if you want to check out like some basic understanding of that, you can also check out that video. I'll link to it here. And the reason why I'm taking this directly to a song is because I don't think it really makes too much sense to talk about this in progressions that are not really related to a song. You kind of want to have both form and melody in there, and be aware of when something is going to fit with the melody and when something is not going to fit with the melody, for instance, and also how it sits in the form, because that becomes important when you're talking about these things, I think. So what I can give you here is mostly just one approach and a few different variations that I might use on a song like the LNBNLU, and hopefully you can use that to just experiment by yourself and figure out some ways of making your own chord progressions that you can use for this kind of outside playing. So let's just get to it. So the first part of the LNBNLU is of course originally just 2 bars of E flat and then a cadence to C minor. So immediately when we have this song, if we leave the E flat alone for now, so we have this long cadence which we can start changing. There are several things you can do with a cadence like that. It's originally a D half diminished, and we need to go to C minor, so we can pretend that it's not a D going to C minor, but that maybe it wants to go to C major, and that means that we can change it to like a D minor 7, for instance. So that could be something like this. And in that way we're sort of, with an alto dominant, going back into C minor. That's one way of doing that. Another thing that fits for this melody, so these few options I'm talking about now are actually fitting for the melody. You can also use them in the theme if you want to. They might work really well in the second half, where people have already heard the first half and then they get sort of a variation of the same melody in the second half. So the other option would be to make it into like 2 cascading or two fives, a half step apart. So that could be, with the melody, that would be something like. So that's of course just simple things, and of course you can make variations on it. You can just play the dominants, and there are several things you can do with that. That's already going to give you some material that's going to sound different from what people expect in there. But you can also look at it in a different way, and then maybe get some stuff that sounds even more far away and it's not going to fit with the melody anymore. One way to do that is to say, well, we have an E flat major 7 where we're starting, and I want to end on a G7 altered. And then I can just fill in chords in between those two and get that to fit. And that's pretty much going to be up to your own taste how you want to work with this. I find that for me, I want to have stuff that if it's outside, I want to have it moving sort of pretty much with a lot of direction towards something that's going back inside. That just works better for me, because it's going to sound really exciting once we start playing something that doesn't fit. If it at the same time also really is moving towards the inside again, then it just works better as a melody. That is of course just my experience with this. You have to sort of figure out what works for you. One way of doing that is to that I actually use quite often for, and that's something sort of a set thing I do for this piece, is that since I have the E flat, basically I just want to get to a G7 up here, and or it doesn't have to be there of course, but one way of doing that is to say, well, we have already had the idea that we could use a D minor 7 instead of the D half diminished, so that sound is in there. And another way of playing that sound is to play an F major. So you can tell, like, I'm just pretty much starting to substitute chords any way I want. And so now we've had the D half diminished, I've turned it into a D minor 7 and then into an F major 7. And the reason why I'm doing that is because then I can do this for one bar of E flat and then one bar of E major, and then just chromatically up to F. And then that is easy to play into the G7 altered. So then you get, and that way you're just sort of taking this short trip out, and then with the dominant you're going back to C minor. So that's one way of doing that. Of course we can find more ways of getting into this. You can already with a melody sort of add extra dominance and stuff. You can always get away with adding extra dominance. For me, with the chromatic thing that I'm using here, the good thing about that is that I'm really using like the E major, where we expect to hear E flat. It's gonna sound pretty far out, and if our ear is expecting D half diminished, then we get F major 7 or something that's also gonna sound like a D minor with a fifth and with a 9, then that's a very different sound. And then hopefully that's kind of easy to play that from this sound into the altered sound and then back. So that's also, like I talk about, the important thing about this is that we have a sort of logical place to start, and then that we can easily move outside and also in a logical way move back inside, and we have a progression that somehow is going to make sense to us. And this is a progression that to me works quite well. So these type of sort of parallel movement that you can sort of add into a progression is something I do quite a lot. If we take the next 4 bars, so C minor 7, and actually that's the C minor 7 for 2 bars, and then cadence to A flat. The common thing to do with There'll Never Be Another You is to add a dominant, so C minor, F7, B flat minor, E flat 7, and then to A flat. Another one that's also quite common, that doesn't, the F7 will fit the melody, but what doesn't fit the melody is to use a B minor. So that works well, and that gives you, of course, like a lot of interesting sort of possibilities in terms of just moving stuff around chromatically. And that's always something that's good to look for, these places where you can just add some sort of chromatic passing chord to go from one chord to the next. Another thing that I do a lot with this piece is also that I'll play the, so if you have a long 2-5 like this one, so the B flat minor, E flat 7 to A flat, then it can make a lot of sense to also just decide to really use a tritone substitute for the whole 2 bars, because that's going to sound pretty far away in this context. So that means that I'll be playing some 2 bars of C minor, and then I'm going to go to E minor, 7 and then to A flat. Because that's also going to give you some lines where, like if you expect, so the normal progression would be, and if instead you do this, then that's going to be like a long stretch of this sound, which is maybe it's a minor 2/5, or maybe it's maybe it's a tritone 2/5, or maybe it's like an also dominant for 2 bars. Both are sort of good to just add some tension, really, and that's all that is. It's just putting down some more tension in the dominant that's gonna resolve, and then just stretching it out and using it longer. Because, as I mentioned, like just having an alto dominant is not gonna be really a strong sound by now. But if you do it, it's the same in a blues. If you play alto dominant for 4 bars before you go to the 4th degree, then that's also going to be quite effectful, because you would never expect to hear an alto dominant in the 1st bar of a blues. So this is again this thing where form is really something that makes that has a huge impact on how you choose your chords and what options you have and how effectful it's going to be. So you kind of need the context of the song. That's kind of clear here, I think. So that's a few options for those parts. If we take the next 4 bars, I'm just going to do 4 bar periods, because that's going to be that's going to give you already a lot of examples, and this is going to get really long. But it's a lot of options, so you can always take it out and see what you can do with it. And I would be curious if you have some favorites yourself, by the way. So if you have some places where you think this is one of the reharmonizations I really like to use, then in this song, then that's always nice to hear about. Maybe that's something I don't know. So if you have them, then let me know. So now we're on the 4th degree, and then it moves to the 4 minor. In this case, that's of course the D flat 7, and then to E flat. And one thing that I do once in a while, it sounds pretty harsh, and in the sense that what we have here is, of course, we have, even though it's like 4 minor back to 1, so we have something where we're moving back to 1, and a good place to add some reharmonization where you like we really expect to hear the resolution to 1. So already when we're on the, we already can hear that now we're going home, because we have that movement in the chord. And if you then choose to not go back home, then that's really useful. And there are a few ways you can do that. One way here, which is kind of obvious, is because we have a D flat 7, and even though that's like a 4 minor in E flat, and we're gonna resolve it up to an E flat major 7, we can also just choose to resolve it as a normal dominant. So in that case, you're gonna resolve it to a G flat, and then instead of playing, you get this instead of this. So that's gonna work quite well. So. And that's already pretty far away. It's kind of like playing E flat minor, in fact. Another one that's really good is to use this dominant and then resolving it not to G flat but to C major. So we get, and that's actually sort of a Coltrane thing to do. And in this context, that's a very sort of far away place to go with the C major. So we had. And that works quite well, especially in this type of form also, because if we play that, you can also just, I think normally when I do this, I probably play it for 2 bars. So I'll be playing the C major 7 all the way to the F7 in the next line. And often you'll precede the F7 with a C minor. So then you get sort of, to go back to the F7. Another one that I use also quite, since this is like A flat and then some sort of A flat minor, and then to E flat, then sometimes you can also look at the A flat minor and then play sort of a B major there, and then you get this idea that you can play sort of, and then it's like all major 7 chords. The point of this is just that we can sort of take any sort of arpeggio that will work on these chords or maybe a pentatonic scale, and then move that up in parallel movement, and then resolving that to E flat. That idea works really well. So that sort of idea will also work, and then it's not very outside. We're just going to get that sort of parallel movement where this one chord, the B flat major 7, is going to sound a bit strange against the A flat and the D flat 7, depending on how you sort of put it in the rhythm. So the next line, so if we go on to the ending of the first half, so that's 2 bars of F7, and then just a basic sort of cadence back to 2-5-1 cadence back to E flat. The F7, of course, you can do sort of the same kind of thing. The F7 is normally a place where you don't really reharmonize that much, because most of the time it actually doesn't fit with the melody, but most of the time people play like a Lydian dominant on the dominant of the dominant. So that's already like kind of already has some color of that sound, so it's less likely that you start messing with it. But you can still do the same thing, so it's not a place where we would expect an also dominant, so that will work really well. And also in this type of form, it's very common that you have this sound for 2 bars, which means that if you choose some other sound like a diminished sound or an alto sound for that long, that's gonna be sort of effectful, because it's not what we expect, and you can sort of keep clashing with what we expect there for some time. That can be quite useful. For the rest, I don't really have too many things I do on this, because there's not really a lot happening in terms of moving from one chord to the next, and this is always going to be followed by a normal cadence. So like a 2-5 or just a 5. And on the 2-5 in this place, so this is a very sort of, this is marking the end of the first half, so it's a good place to sort of kick in some things. So an alto dominant is very common at that point, I think. In this case we have, just to talk about that maybe, we have an A flat in the melody for both of the bars, right? So a very common reharmonization for this is to also again add this sort of chromatic 2-5 movement. So you come across that quite often in a song like this. You can do that in this song, you can do it in It Could Happen to You, you can do that in the end of the first day of Have You Met Miss Jones. It's a very common thing. I think it works as well in Gone with the Wind. So there are lots of songs where you can get away with adding this sort of, which is almost like a side slip really, but it also works as a dominant to the next chord, and then you can resolve that. So that's also important like that. So that's one way of doing that. Another one that works really well, actually got from my teacher at the conservatory once, was to use an E major, which is not the kind of chord that I would expect to have instead of an F minor. But I mean, in the context, also even with the melody, that works really well. I think it's also that simply just sounds beautiful, in fact. And of course it works well. If you look at it from sort of a functional point of view and want to explain the theory here, then the E major is a subdominant, it's a minor subdominant in E flat. So that's, and so F minor is of course also subdominant. So it is just sort of staying within the same kind of function, but then using a minor version. Like you could also use a minor 7 flat 5 instead of the minor 7 to create some sort of a minor cadence. That will work as well. So that works well. Another thing that's also can be useful is to add some like a ladybird turnaround or some Coltrane changes. And in this context, the place you want to go in E flat, usually if you look at the ladybird turnaround, that would be like, that would be this. And of course right now we can't start on the E flat because it's going to start on the F minor, but you can still do the same thing. If you check out Parker's version of Embraceable You, I think, has exactly this in the, or at least least I think it's that one that has it. Could be that I'm wrong actually, but correct me if I'm wrong. I know a version of Embraceable You where they do exactly this in the end of the first half. So which I think also, again, we're using something that really works with the melody, and that just makes all the difference. It just makes it sound really good. Oh, sorry, that's a major seven and a dominant. So that's something that can be used both for soloing and also in general just for how you harmonize the song. Okay, then we get pretty much the same thing. So the rest of the song is pretty much just repeating this until we get to the A half diminished D7, and then the last sort of. So let's see. The only thing you can do, whenever you have a minor cadence, you can turn it into a major cadence and see how that works. And of course the other way around as well. And you can also keep the sort of the direction of it, because it's still going to be the same cadence, so you can still resolve it to wherever you would normally resolve it. For the rest, there's not so much to say about that progression, I think. Then we get back down to the very last progression. So the whole sort of. So one way to look at this is, of course, really what we have here is just 2 bars of E flat and then a 2/5. So you don't actually have to play all the other chords, like that's a bit low to play it on, but okay. Right, so that's with all the chords, so the A flat, G minor, C, F minor. But really, you can also just get away. Let's just do that a little bit higher. So that's reharmonizing all of that with an E flat chord. So that will work, of course, and that means that you can do similar things to what you do in the beginning. So you can make it into, for instance, E flat, and then E, and then up to F minor, E flat, those kind of things. It also lends itself really well because we already have like, essentially what we have here is just a circle of, or all like movement in fifths. So even though this is a tritone substitute, so we can turn that into all sorts of chains of dominance, and you can turn it into like, you start on E flat and then go to A flat 7, G7, G flat 7, and then down to F minor. That will work. We can also just make it all chromatic, so, and then to F minor. We can even take the F minor and make that into a B7 actually. That will work as well. One thing, because the song kind of calls for this kind of movement in somewhere in the chord, right? Or if we do, so with the different bass notes, you still want to have that movement. You can also make it into something else by not using that movement. And if you look at, so basically what we have here is we have an E flat and then we need to go to F minor, and the way we go to the F minor is a C7 eventually. So if we change the C7 into a G flat 7, so tritone substitute again, then you could also just notice that we start on E flat and then we could move chromatically up to G flat. So which, as when I play it like this as chords, it's not so beautiful, but since we're sort of expecting, then making lines with it and then moving up is a sort of a counterpoint movement, and is sort of increasingly going away and into space. And then because we're ending up here on a dominant that we can just resolve normally, then it's going to be really easy to just put it in there and add it as something that we can get out of really quickly also. So that's definitely also an option for that one. That was some of the ideas that I use on There'll Never Be Another You in terms of reharmonizing it and getting some sort of more surprising outside sounds while I'm improvising over it. And also a few that you can actually use when you're just playing the theme. So there are some different options, and of course you can tell like some of them will work with the melody, some of them won't. in itself interesting, I think, because it can be useful to have other ways of presenting the melody with a different chords, different set of chord changes. And I think some of those that I went over here actually sound really cool are really beautiful for the piece. I hope that I can sort of put this together in a video editing that actually makes sense. If I don't manage to do that and it's a mess, then of course you can tell me that I suck at video editing by leaving a comment. And for the rest, if you have any ideas for other songs where you have some reharmonizations you'd like to use, like I already mentioned a few other songs where there are sort of common reharmonizations, then that's always useful to know. I think a lot of people would be interested in knowing that, because it's not something that there's a whole lot of material on YouTube or on the net in general. But it is really a huge part of improvising in modern jazz, and also really a big part of how we approach standards. I think that you might play the changes that are there for some part, but you will also add your own sort of take on it. And part of being able to improvise with the chords is also part of improvising a solo. So we're not only playing lines over chords, we're also just messing around with what the chords are, and you can have more or less inspired ideas with that. I think some of the things that I went over here, I actually came across a little bit by accident, and they're coming out of me playing, and then all of a sudden you realize that you can just go somewhere else with this chord, and then that starts to make sense, and then I've later figured out what chords I'm really thinking, and that's also part of this approach, that you sort of make sense of it in that way. That there's a component in here in terms of how you treat chords that's also important, and that's also going to be a question of being creative. I think if you check out how somebody like Brad Melder solos, then you will hear a lot of different changes coming along, and I think that in itself can be sort of interesting to check out. I also checked out a lot of Keith Jarrett for this, actually. So as usual, if you want to support me in making these videos, then you can of course check out my Patreon page. And if you have any questions about the stuff that I went over here, or suggestions for things I should do a video on, then leave a comment on this video or connect with me on social media. So on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Google+, and let me know there. It's always nice to get feedback, as I said often, but that's true actually. I think it's important that I hear what you guys think, and also just if you guys have suggestions that this could be interesting to get into, then that's how I make a lot of videos actually. This one is not directly coming out of a comment, but it's very often that I get questions and use those as material for videos, so feel free to ask. That's about it for this video. Thank you for watching, and there's a new lesson on Thursday, so see you then.